But as soon as Angie comes on, we'll begin. Okay, there's Angie. Okay, it's 5:34, July 16th. This is a meeting of the Housing Subcommittee. Call the meeting to order. Present, Steve Schultz,
Here.
Dorothy Red,
Here.
Angie Gorel, Angie will respond in a moment. Dave Kelly. I see Dave here, and Paul Arena. Angie, are you with us yet? We'll just wait. I'm sure she'll join in. Do we have any public comment tonight, Mr. Chapman?
No.
Okay, then I'll forego reading that. We get on to our agenda item D, procedure for dealing with a request to reject the property buyer from the auction process. So when we passed the trustee agreement, there was a request by municipalities to be able to reject buyers. We discussed a little bit at that time how to do it. We didn't have any clear agreement on how it would work. All of you should have received a copy of the trustee agreement that we passed. In paragraph H, all it says is, should a bid that was not the highest bid be recommended based on due diligence, the property shall be brought to the county board for consideration of the sale. So we've gone through the first auction process, and when I believe we do have some requests to reject buyers. Our goal is to make sure that we're treating people fairly and that we don't end up getting the county tied up in a lawsuit over this. So I see Mrs. Crosby's has joined us. And I see Angie, are you on the call? Angie Gorel, you're with us now?
I'm with you now.
Great. Okay, so we're all here. So, so what we need to do is figure out how we're going to handle this. I don't know. I just this afternoon, I had a brief conversation with Ms. Crosby about it. I don't know if we can. Well, I guess we could hear from her on her perspective. I thought maybe we could somehow put the liability on the municipality that's requesting the sale be rejected. We sell to anyone who's not in, who's permitted to buy based on the criteria established by the municipality, because each municipality might have their own set of standards. But Ms. Crosby, could you kind of give everyone on the call a little bit of information that you shared with me today about
Sure,
what's
sure,
your
be happy
what's
to.
obligation? What's our obligation, I guess?
Well, first off, in the purchase of real property, many times the property doesn't go to the highest bidder because there's all kinds of factors. There's closing dates and contingencies and financing and inspections and all kinds of stuff that play into it. So it's not uncommon in my industry to see something that a full price offer get rejected, but it has to be for cause. It can't be because of a fair housing, any of the protected classes, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say we have a landlord out there who's buying properties and he's loaded with code violations. So maybe the municipalities, or we might give them some guidance by saying anybody that has 10 code violations in the last 5 years is going to get kicked off the list, period. Or we can look up court records to see how many evictions they have to deal with if they're loaded with evictions. Now, I owned at one time with my husband 100 units. So I know that tenants can call the health department on their landlord if they get mad, or they can call codes and regs if they get mad, and those kind of things. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is people that are irresponsible in maintaining their properties in an appropriate manner. That's what we're talking about. So we could set a criteria for code violations. You could set a criteria for evictions. If they're always doing evictions, probably their screening processes aren't real good. All right, they just rent to anybody. My husband's calling me, and et cetera, et cetera. So we need to give them some kind of, or they need to go by some kind of real cause if they're going to reject a bidder.
Okay,
That's my input.
okay. Thank you. So I'd like to hear from other members of this committee or other board members. What do you think is fair? I think part of this is we could think about it in terms of how would you want to be treated yourself? If you go, you're the highest bidder on a property and then you're told, we're not going to sell it to you. What would be your expectation as far as an explanation?
May I interrupt?
Okay, but Mr. Schultz had his hand up first. So Mr. Schultz and then Ms. Gorel.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. One is that, obviously we're going to lean heavily into our legal counsel in terms of their knowledge around what's allowable. I mean, what has some kind of case precedent in terms of where entities like ours have been safe with certain boundaries. And so that's a piece of the puzzle for me. And then just another thought would be, we'd like to hear, I think, from the municipalities regarding what are the criteria they would like to use. And so we have something to respond to. That is, they have a particular variety of things that they would like to be included. And then we could take that feedback and run that through the state's attorney's office as well as other folks in this industry and say, is that allowable or is that reasonable?
Thank you. Ms. Gorel?
She's pretty well on track right now of what she has said. And many times you have to look at the whole situation. You can't go by piece by piece by piece. the municipalities, we should all be, and R1 and Winnebago County itself, we should all be on the same page. We should not have different rules for different areas, different people. It should all be one. We cannot have, 5 municipalities come in here and give us their opinion. So Jean's pretty close to what we need to do, and so are you, Steve. Both of you are on the same track. Both of you have the same idea, and that's the way it should be. And we truly need to make one plan for all. And if others want to put in what they think should be on that plan, that's fine. But we cannot go municipality by municipality. That's going to be out. You can't do that. You shouldn't do it, I should say. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Gurl. Mr. McDonald, Mr. McDonald, then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume we have had a couple denials where the highest bidder is not getting brought in from municipalities. Do you know which municipalities those are?
Mr. Chapman, do you know?
I don't have the list in front of me, but I believe most of them are in the city of Rockford.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Chairman. We don't have authority over the municipalities to tell them they can or can't do anything.
Right, that's correct. I think they're asking us to reject the buyer at their request, so.
But we have to know why. Because like Jean said, we have the law, we can get sued if we don't go according to what we're supposed to do with even real estate law of as long as you have a willing, able buyer, and that buyer, they can belong to any of the protected classes, we can't stop that. You take that, because otherwise, if you don't, you have a real good possibility of getting sued. This happened many times in the real estate business. This isn't uncommon. And you really need to take a good look at it and be sure that we are within the law of what we decide to do. Just because the city of Rockford wants us to do things one way, does that actually fall into the law of real estate? Because this is real estate that we're dealing with. This is one way we definitely need our attorney with us before we start making decisions that are wrong. And Paul, you've been in this business long enough. You know there are statutes out there and laws out there that we have to, in the real estate business, follow. This should be following those same set of laws. It's not, if that is that buyer is qualified, if that buyer has the highest bid, or wherever he comes with that bid, you have to look at it and take it really serious. You need to go back and take a look at why they don't want us to accept this bid or that bid or the other bid. Who are they doing it for?
Right. Well, thank you, Ms. Squirrel. I think that was kind of why we were trying to establish a uniform policy for everyone, because if we look at everything on a case-by-case basis, I think that's where we end up having potential problems, because, if we apply one set of standards to one person and a different set of standards to the next person, people could start accusing us of acting in a discriminatory manner. And I'm wondering, I mentioned this earlier, if our code just said that we're going to sell subject to the municipality ordinance on who is permitted to buy through this sale, can we push that back onto the municipalities for them to decide themselves what standards those are, and would we be protected from liability if that was all we were using as a criteria? State's Attorney Height Ross, can you answer that?
First, let me address something that was said earlier
Okay.
about putting it on the municipalities. This is all under the umbrella of Winnebago County. It's the Winnebago County Trustee Program. It's not a municipality trustee program. So the onus is on the county. Obviously, it's prudent to get input from the municipalities, but ultimately, if the process is flawed and buyers feel they are unfairly rejected, it will be on Winnebago County, the umbrella Winnebago County As you will recall, when we were doing this agreement, our suggestion was that there be a criteria included in the agreement, but that's not what the members decided. So now what you have is you have a process in place and you're working backwards to make sure that you don't have discrimination with selling the properties. And if all of you will remember, those were comments that I did make because I didn't want to make sure that the county was insulated from liability. So what you're going to have to look at, first of all, is you're going to have to look at the Fair Housing Act. You know, it's no different in selling properties. Just because the property is under the umbrella of a trustee program, you know, all legitimate buyers have a right to purchase that property unless there is a valid reason that they should not be able to purchase that property. So that's the view that I would be looking at it as your legal advisor. And you're going to have a pretty good reason, in my opinion, to deny someone the opportunity to purchase a property if they have the means and are willing to pay the price for that property. If someone is a member of a suspect class, and let's just be very clear what a suspect class is, it includes race, gender, ethnicity, age, and those buyers are not permitted to purchase the property. You're going to have an
That's right.
trying to defend why they were not allowed to purchase that property.
Okay. So can we just, if we set a standard of a certain number of unresolved code violations in a year, would that adequately protect us?
I would say, can I speak, Paul?
Yeah, please go
You
ahead.
know, I would say, you know, and I said to this, Paul, earlier, I view this more as an evaluation. When someone goes into a lender to purchase a house, they have to have job security. If they're going to get a mortgage, they have to have good credit. You have to prove where your debt is and how much that debt is. I mean, there's a whole slew of criteria that they have to pass in order to make that purchase. And the similar process should be done on this. I'm not sure if 1 year gives you enough historical data regarding the ability for that individual to be a responsible property owner. I think you have to look more than a year because you want to get a historical perspective. If they have code violations every year and have had them for the last 15 years, you got a problem. See what I'm saying? So, I mean, you need a little bit more than just 1 year. And the same thing with, you know, same thing with an eviction policy. If they're evicting all the time, they're not doing good screening. So if you have a standard of care out there that they have to be able to perform to, has nothing to do with race or gender, or if they've had an honorable or dishonorable discharge from the service. It has nothing to do with that. It has their ability to take care of the property correctly. And those are the kind of things in the standard that needs to be there. And they should know that standard of care coming in. So that way they can, you know, they either fit the mold or they don't. Banks don't throw mortgages at people that have low credit scores and who switch jobs every 30 days. They just don't do it. So historical perspective is very important.
I'd like to weigh in on that if I could.
Yeah, please do.
So it's one thing to have criteria, but as all of you know, when they had the housing crisis hit, there were criteria put in place. On the face, it looked legitimate, but upon investigation, it was considered suspect and discriminatory. So you can have factors in place that on the face of it and face value, they do look legitimate, but when they are actually implemented, they unfairly have a disparate impact on certain individuals that might be a member of that suspect class. So you have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I agree.
And another thing too, if they're paying cash, they also have to have proof of cash for closing. We just can't say, oh, you're going to have cash. That's wonderful. And you get to closing to find out they don't have cash. Or then they say, oh, I don't have it this month. I'll give it to you next month or the month after. So it's really important right up front. You find out that if they are going to pay cash, that they have the ability to pay it.
Right.
And
So
a
a lot
more
of these-
mortgage, our contract with the Association of Realtors and all realtors, that's part of our contract is proof of funds to close. Don't care how they got them, but they have to prove they have funds to close.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Gorel. A lot of these properties are very inexpensive, $500, you know, they're vacant. A lot of them are vacant lots. So, Mr. Schultz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few thoughts. One is that I think, Mr. Chairman, you brought an idea forward. Could we avoid liability by pushing it back on the municipalities and whatever the criteria they would have? And I think State's Attorney Height Ross responded to that. Well, it was a good idea. She kind of shot that down. Another thought is that, you know, this is, and forgive me because I'm not a real estate professional, but I am a lender by profession. And I don't believe that the purchase, the financing going through a bank is identical to a
I
county
agree.
selling a property.
I
We don't-
agree.
We don't have the same criteria, and that's
agree.
why I really believe that we're flying blind if we don't have the specific criteria that the municipality, in this case Rockford, wants us to apply, get that information, and then hand that off to the state's attorney's office and then have the evaluation. Is that something we could do and be protected? And if their opinion is yes, there's case law that says it's okay for us to have that criteria, then we move ahead. If the attorney's office says no, you know, that is going to be a problem for us, then we have to go back to the municipality and say, we're sorry. There may be other criteria we can use, but not the ones you're requesting.
So just to, if I can real quick interject on Mr. Schultz's comment, we could go by what Rockford asks, but I'm just wondering, whatever we adopt is going to have to apply to every municipality in the county equally. And so I think we'd have to get input from everyone. I think. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm not part of the subcommittee, but I do have to second Marilyn Height Ross's comments on ensuring, you know, that we don't violate any housing, you know, authority guidelines that we currently have. Since it falls back on our liability, I think we should step forward. Just like Mr. Schultz has mentioned, listen from the municipalities on the different criteria that they're thinking about, but ultimately it comes back to us and we're the ones held accountable, even though Regional Plan 1 is executing the trustee program on that nature. So I just would like to maybe have that formalized going forward, recommendations, you know, funnel it through the state's attorney, hear the insight from the municipalities of what the biggest issues that they have on these bidders that are awarded, and see what sorts of things that they're looking at, and see if we can look at the housing guidelines that we have, that we're not violating any, whether it's on gender, race, or whatever, or low income or high income, whatever it is, that we're not violating those primarily. So that would alleviate some of the liability. So that's my recommendation to you. I'm not part of the subcommittee, but you know, as Mr. Schultz and so forth, Marilyn Height Ross has mentioned, I think that's the way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair,
Go ahead, Ms. Red, and then Mr. Kelly.
I think we have a cutoff time for the bids, and I think that needs to be looked at very closely, because if the cutoff time has passed, then bids should not be submitted after that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Red. I think what's happened is they get multiple bids and they want to reject the highest bid and go to the second highest bid. So it's not that, well, actually, I think that I have to go back and look at their procedures. I think that they they have a period of time where they announce to the public that bids have been received, and then they give 7 more days for more bids to come in. That's procedures in the operation of the program. And I think that's separate from what we're talking about today. But these buyers that'll be rejected, there's a backup bid from someone else, is my understanding.
I think you're right, Paul.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, did you have?
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's provision in the agreement already for any municipality to reject anything.
So what it says, all it says is that should a bid that was not the highest bid be recommended based on due diligence, the property shall be brought to the county board for consideration of the sale. So it doesn't elaborate on what due diligence means based on due diligence. It's just, Region 1 is going to come to us and say, we've received a request not to sell to, Bob Smith. We want to sell it to somebody else.
I'll take a look, but I'm pretty sure that we had a separate thing in there that any municipality could reject the idea of even disposing of a property.
There was different language, but what I'm reading is Mr. Chapman should have sent to all the board a copy of the version that was passed on the floor. And so the language I just read to you was from that. I didn't find anything else in here that was any more detailed than that language. But I'll reread it, and possibly there is. Mr. Butita, you had a comment?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm also not a member of this committee, but I do have a question. I'm a little confused. The land bank board that we appointed, or we appointed one member to it. Are they dictating the policy for the trustee program? Are these things that are, so that's a no. So
well, the land bank is a completely separate entity from the trustee program. So the two are not related at all. Other than that, there's a provision in here to maybe shift funds from this program to the land bank, but they're like McDonald's and Burger King. They both deal with real estate, but they're just different businesses. So it sounds to me like the consensus is we need to go to the municipalities, and I guess we should at least make a request to all of them to let them all have the opportunity to weigh in on what criteria they want to use. And it seems to me that it's the consensus that we can't just do it on a case-by-case basis. We have to have uniform standards that apply to everybody, right? So I can do that. I can follow up with sending a letter, or someone will send a letter to all the municipalities and ask them for what criteria they want us to use to make this decision. And we can meet again next week to talk about it. Is there anybody else that has any other comments or input that they want for today?
Yes, Paul. We need to put together a uniform criteria, and that way we all understand it, everyone understands it, and to make sure that we have the fair housing, we go up with their guidelines as we do this. But we have no real guidelines of who can, who can't, why can't they, and we need to have that down in writing, black and white. If the municipalities would like to give some suggestions to it, fine, but then we'll put it all together and do actually with our state's attorney's office what is fair and keeps us out of trouble.
Okay.
We don't always like the person we're working with, but that's beside the point. That's our personal opinion, and that has to stay out of the picture. We have to look at the whole picture, and we cannot make this on a personal basis. What's good for one, it's good for all. Thank you.
Right. And then I guess another thing that we should just decide is, do you think that there'd be circumstances where the county would want to reject a buyer? So we can also, consider that from our perspective. We could just adopt whatever policy that the municipalities have, but keep in mind our goal is to get rid of these properties, so we don't want to be rejecting buyers if we can move them along as fast as possible because we have too many in the program already. Okay, Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, sorry, just a late breaking thought, Mr. Chairman, and that is that we may, if this is allowable, we may want to put some provision into our acceptance of a bid that either requires or at least requests that certain action be taken after they purchase the property. And I don't know, I'm just thinking about if you have an entity that doesn't act in good faith after they've made a purchase, and we anticipated, after the sale that they were going to do such and so, I'm just planting that as a seed that if we could actually put something in there, it would be beneficial to us.
So like some type of a condition on the sale so that they have to take actions after they own it?
We're selling it to them in good faith with the idea that this is going to get back on the tax rolls. And again, I'm out of my league in terms of knowing what we can say to someone after they've purchased it. But if we have certain intentions for the property, at a minimum, they need to maintain it. But again, if there's anything, it'd just be nice to have the ability to say, okay, we gave you X amount of time to follow through and do the right thing with this property. Now that you own it, you didn't do that, and now, but again, that's out of my own ignorance, and that may not be allowed.
All right, but I've noted it down and we can look into that. And then the other
May I-
thing, go
May I
ahead.
interrupt for a minute? Steve, you are absolutely right. Even on the Board of Health, when we've had it happen recently this last year, where a developer bought all this property and all of a sudden, even though there was a trunk line for sewer, they wanted to go back onto septic. And one particular piece of that property was right on the border. And what we did is we gave them 1 year to put a house, not just a dwelling, a house on that property. Because if not, that variance was going to be deleted. You're absolutely right. There has to be a time when we out here on this West End years ago, we had so many vacant lots in the county that it looked like the city dump because everybody was buying these vacant lots thinking they were going to turn them over and make big money. In the meantime, they were all being dumped on with garbage and tires and everything else. We now call that Hope 6. And so, yes, there should be, when they do the application, I believe right on the application it says, what are you going to do with this property? And if they can't do that within 1 year, they should lose that property. They should also put on that contract, too, that they need to maintain it. Because if they don't maintain it, we're right back in the same situation we are right now. And so we have to look at their forms when people fill that out to purchase that property, that there is also dialogue on there, letting them know they have 1 year, either, if they're going to put a dwelling or whatever they say they're buying, the purpose of purchasing that property for, should be done in 1 year, and in that 1 year time, they should be maintaining that property. That should not be coming back on the city, the county, or whoever to maintain it for them. I think that's very important. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Angie. And then while we've been talking here, I recalled when we first were looking at the trustee program, someone had pointed me to the state of Michigan's trustee program, their tax delinquent program, and it's a statewide program, and they felt it was well structured. They have standards in there for who may buy, and I'll look at that too, because I assume since it's been in place for quite a long time, it's now obviously Michigan laws are different, but still fair housing law is federal. So maybe we could look at how they reject buyers and model after that. So I'll research that. So I'm going to get the input from the municipalities. We're going to try to establish uniform criteria. It's not violation of fair housing. And then I'll look into the Michigan structure. And then Mr. Schultz's question about control after the sale and squirrels. So
I have a comment.
go ahead, Ms. Height Ross.
Okay, so to comment on what Mr. Schultz said, the redemption of tax delinquent properties is very specific by statute. So just for a quick synopsis, a person who purchases the property is a certain amount of time, they have to redeem it or not redeem it or let it go back. So you cannot interfere with that process because that is designated by statute. You also, once they purchase the property, unless there are zoning ordinances which would apply to that property, you cannot order what they use the property for. So for example, if someone's purchasing an abandoned gas station, the zoning ordinance says it can only be used for a type of business. That's where that would be applicable. But if someone's buying a lot in a residential area and it's not zoned business, then obviously they wouldn't be able to put a business on that lot without a variance or a special zoning permit. But you cannot pre-buying it, tell them that you have to do this with the property. When they purchase that property is subject to the zoning laws that are currently in place where that property lies. So I just wanted to add that comment for all of you.
Thank you, State's Attorney Height Ross. Okay, so I think
Michigan, that actually came from my office. Mr. Emmert and I were looking at outside areas that had these types of situations, and I actually researched Michigan. But as you indicated, their state laws are different, but apparently they have a very robust program that they've been using to fight blight in a lot of their cities, including Detroit. So that's where that came from.
Oh, okay, good. And do you think that there might be some useful information there, like something we can model after, or do you recall that?
I think there was a lot of useful information there, which is why I asked Mr. Emmert to share that. Yes.
Okay.
Some of those may have to be implemented through new legislation, but certainly I thought that they had a lot of good ideas on addressing blight in the communities there.
All right, great. So I think primarily I'll go back, I'll look at that, I'll pull whatever data I can on that, and I'll contact Rockford and the other municipalities, or maybe so I'll just talk to Mr. Chapman about how we get that together for all the municipalities. So is there any other comments or any other input on this issue for tonight? Yes, seeing none. Are there any other matters for this committee to discuss tonight? Okay, seeing none. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Schultz, second by Mr. Kelly. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
All right, we'll get started with the Finance Committee. Looks like most of the participants are online and ready to go. So I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee. It is currently 6:11, Thursday, July 16th. Roll call, myself present, Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Girl.
Present.
Mr. Fiducia.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
All right, let the record reflect. We do have a quorum. Next item is approval of the May 14, 2020 minutes. Can I get a motion and a second? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Girl, thank you. Questions, discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you very much. Mr. Chapman, is there anyone that signed up to speak for this committee?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. We'll skip public comment and move on to our next item, which is a budget amendment 2020-021, the Health Department. Can I get a motion and a second? Motion by Mr. Girl, second by Mr. Hoffman. Discussion, Mr. Chapman. You're on mute, Mr. Chapman.
I would defer to Mr. Keeler, who's the finance director from the Health Department, that can explain this amendment.
Sure. Mr. Keeler, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chapman. This is a budget for a contact tracing grant that we were awarded at the Health Department. It spans 2 fiscal years, the county year 2020 and then 2021. We recently executed the contract and expect funding shortly. And so this will shift expenses that we anticipate having prior to the end of the fiscal year for ramping up personnel for our contact tracing team, and then work items such as workstations and furnishings and computers and such for the project.
Is there any questions for Mr. Keeler? All right, seeing none, no further discussion. Let's take this for a vote. All in favor of approving budget amendment 2020-021 Health Department, signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Keeler.
All right, thank you.
Yep, next item on our agenda is the Health Department update, and I will hand it over to Dr. Martell or Mr. Chapman if they're on the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the update, I believe Mr. McDonald asked that this be placed on the agenda. We reviewed the website and that, and as far as the Health Department and as far as closings and so on, there's no closings reflected on the website at this particular time. So I assume that, you know, if there are none there, I believe they update that daily. So
go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chapman is correct. I do check that website multiple times a day. Thus far, there's nobody been shut down listed on the website. I would just wonder if Dr. Martell could talk a little bit about how her and her, I don't know if they're inspectors or how you would define the people, but how are you finding the businesses? Are they in general willing to fall in line or provide safe service, or what are you seeing out there, Dr. Martell?
Yes, we have found, obviously, because we have not had to move to closure, that businesses typically either are in compliance, so it's a non-validated complaint. If it's a validated complaint, then we look for them to post signage and to come into compliance. And so we have had good success in providing that education and support.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Martell, have you had to issue any warnings, or has there been any close calls or anything over the last week or two since we've passed this?
No.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the Health Department update? Seeing none, we will move forward to our next item. Thank you, Dr. Martell, for that information. And Mr. Chapman, is a resolution authorizing execution of agreement to advance $45,000 to the Community Mental Health Board. Can I get a motion and a second? Motion by Mr. Girl, second by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you very much. Discussion, Mr. Chapman. I know there's a couple people on staff on site here that could speak to this, so I'll defer that time to you guys.
I would defer to Mr. Reverend Copeland and Paul Carpenter, who's the attorney for the board. The request came through Mr. Carpenter to myself from the board. So if I believe Mr. Copeland can speak to it.
First of all, good evening.
I'm zoomed out, so if I look like a zombie, please forgive me. But secondly, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It's sort of straightforward. The Mental Health Board has been meeting. We want to go ahead and get started on some things that we've been meeting about, and we've contacted the R1 Regional Planning Council to deal with all our administrative stuff. I believe you might have a copy of the proposed agreement. We want to do a 3-month piece just to try it out, make sure that it's suiting our needs, and we're asking for that advance of 45.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Copeland. Just to give you a little bit of information, Mr. Carpenter reached out to myself and Mr. Chapman regarding they were seeking to get a loan through a local bank, I want to say, and you know, some ideas came around, and we decided, you know, why not do it through the host fees? It was brought up, our loan program that we have, you know, internally. That was another discussion, but ultimately the thing is that they're not receiving their revenue until October 1st. After October 1st, the sales, tax sales are coming in for the mental health. So this is why they need an advance essentially to get started on this. And so we feel from that perspective that there is no liability potentially there. It's just a matter of them getting their revenue and obviously paying the loan off, or the money that they are essentially going to borrow from this perspective. And so talking to Mr. Chapman a little bit, that's where, you know, the money's coming from, is the host fees. But ultimately they presented the spreadsheets attached to the documents, the breakdown essentially of the $45,000, 15, 15, 15, I believe, in different areas that they're looking to do that. So it's pretty straightforward, as Mr. Copeland has mentioned. Paul, is there anything else you want to throw in there, or on that nature?
Not too much. I think that you made the point that they'll just be repaid from the mental health tax revenue when it comes in October. So, and there's no issue on that. The spreadsheet showed 3 different areas that R1 PC would be compensated for: administrative tech support, website environmental scan release, and request for proposals, developing that and releasing it.
Thank you, Paul. I see a hand from Mr. Dick. Do you want to make a comment? You had your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that I had spoken with Marianne Abadi a few weeks ago, and she had talked to me about the challenge of their operating expenditures, and I advised her to put together a spreadsheet to present to your committee so that you could authorize operating funds for the mental health board. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. And I want to thank Pastor Copeland for getting that information to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dick. I know you had a
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, or a comment.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have an apology. I was naive enough to go to room 303 and realized I was in a whole lot of trouble. So I apologize for this, but would like to, join Pastor Copeland in answering any of your questions. And thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. You had your hand up, and then Paul, and then Mr. Schultz after that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This basically would be like a tax anticipation. We're giving them a $45,000 bond, no interest on it though, and it's just like a tax anticipation bond we're giving them. So there's anticipated revenue. The $45,000 is anticipated coming in October 1st. That will pay back the host fees, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Arena, and then Mr. Schultz, I think, had his hand up. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question of this committee. I was looking through the packet and I couldn't find the information. All of this $45,000 is being paid to Region 1, and does the work that they're doing have to be bid out, or it just seems like a lot of money to be handing over just to them, unless it's defined in here exactly what it's providing.
Mr. Copeland?
It's not,
I thought we had sent you a professional services agreement draft, but here it is if you don't have it. And basically, we're talking about administrative and tech support, developing a website, and we have done an environmental scan and releasing that scan to the appropriate, in the public in appropriate ways, helping us to develop the RFP and releasing all of that. So in terms of the actual agreement, I'm sorry if you don't have a copy before you, they estimated the hours, and basically we would pay them at the rate, at the discounted, what do you call it, county rate, whatever the Winnebago County member rate is. And also, if I remember correctly from Mr. Holcomb, Jason Holcomb, who is the person who is our contact, that it wouldn't be a double dip type of thing. Whatever hours are charged will be, if I can say it this way, whatever staff they need in order to do what we need done is included in the hourly fee.
Right.
Mr. Cooner, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. So Paul, what we would be doing, we're asking for the $45,000 to cover what would be a maximum expense that we would see potentially in this period of time for work that we need to have done. They would not be just simply getting, the $45,000, but it would be paid out for an hourly rate when they perform the work, because different people within the planning organization would be responsible for the work, and we're not able to know that totally at this time.
Go ahead, Mr. Arena.
Thank you for the follow-up. So I think this is because I'm unfamiliar with exactly how Region 1 is supposed to function, but they're a unit of government. They're part of our government structure. I don't understand why we're hiring them as an outside contractor. They have people on staff to do work. Why are they getting extra money? Are they bringing on additional staff, or are they subbing it out? I would think if they're helping, we already pay them a fee every year to do stuff for us, right? We get a certain number of hours. It just, I don't understand how that relationship works. And I understand this might be the wrong place to get an explanation. I'll have to look into it, but it's confusing to me that that we're talking about them like they're separate from government when they're part of our government structure.
Sure. Mr. Schultz, you were next, and then go ahead.
And I would after him, please.
Okay.
I'm in a similar place as Mr. Arena, and obviously there's a lot of moving parts here. One of the things that I thought I had seen in the process was that the county really, based on the structure of this new mental health board, doesn't have the ability to provide input as it relates to how they choose to go about their work. And if that's the case, then we have very little say as to whether they use R1 or who they use. But it would make sense to me that we would look at the available resources within the county as a first step and say, are there folks that we have within the county administration? And I'd lean into Steve Chapman in regard to answering that. And then the other thing is just my perception, honestly, is that we are asking R1 to do a very wide variety of things on behalf of quite different kinds of operations. As we're bringing new initiatives forward, it seems like R1 is kind of the default place that we're going. And I'm not sure that they can, in fairness, be good at all of the wide variety of things that we're assigning to them as we're adding new programs, because it's come from very, very different perspectives as far as the kind of work they're being asked to do. So those are the thoughts banging around in my head. And honestly, if the mental health board can do whatever they want and hire whoever they want, and this is just a matter of advancing the funds, then I'm not opposing us advancing the funds. There's a revenue source that's going to be coming in. And so we're floating them, as everyone is saying, a short-term loan. And if that's really all that this amounts to, then maybe we don't need to see the backup agreement. And all it is, we agree to advance the money.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Ms. Gorel, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, I would like to have Dick Cooner explain what his environment survey is, how it has to be handled, who's going to actually do that for us, and why. Because it's going to begin a whole new database, and I want Dick to explain all that to you so you have a good understanding of one of the reasons that they're using R1. Could you have Mr. Cooner on to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cooner.
All right. So this gets also to giving an answer to Mr. Schultz's issues that he brought up. As it turns out, there happens to be a man now in regional planning who has an expert background in mental health. He's a social worker. He has had experience both as a clinician and also as an administrator. So as it turns out that we've got a really perfect person in a perfect place to be helpful to us. What Ms. Gorel is talking about is one of the things that we put together and the board has accepted, and that is when we went into this, we are using a model, the community support program, which is nationally accepted as best practice. We then created a community scan using that structure. And so we are at the front of being able to send out to approximately 150 different agencies of private, not-for-profit, governmental agencies to get a picture of what exists in the way of mental health and addiction services within the community. So one of the pieces of work that we would be asking from this administrator would be to manage the data and create the database for us that would allow us to then know where the community priorities are and where we would be wise to be helping in the way of any of support, monetary support to these places. So that would be the big piece of work that would be that R1 would be involved in the 3 months that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Mr. Cooner. Before I go to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Copeland, first I just I think the easiest question I think that Mr. Arena kind of asked is like, did you guys go through an RFP process to select the individual, which institution would obviously provide that support for you? I think that's the biggest kicker here that people want to know is, was there a vetting process that went through?
No, there was vetting in the sense of wanting to find out from people in different parts of the community who would be potentially good at this. But to answer Mr. Arena's, no, we did not set up an RFP to go after this administrative piece.
Okay, thank you. And so I'll go to Mr. McDonald now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the county board, first off, I believe we passed this unanimously to be on the ballot. Now you're coming to us and asking us to help you get started, and I think most of us are willing to do that. The question I have is, as a former first responder, I've obviously seen the need on the street for mental health and the help they're in. We've obviously, like I said, shown that we're willing participants and partners. What do you anticipate? How are you able to help Winnebago County in dealing with this mental health thing between the Sheriff's Department, Corrections, Public Defender, all throughout the county levels? What can your organization do to help us?
Go ahead, Mr. Cooner or Mr. Copeland.
I think what we can do for you is this is not in a sense, new. The community has worked at this before. But as I'm saying, what we have is a plan to create an array of services that we know from practice models that work. So for example, we're looking at, and we'll be looking at, models of crisis intervention that can be supportive of first responders. To be looking at how does the mental health system work with law enforcement, and how can they do that in best ways, and how can we make it better in the Winnebago County in terms of backing and giving mental health support to first responders. We know that that's going to be a big priority. The second area that we know is going to be a big priority is for children. That we're trying to do something again for first response, that particularly we're not sending out kids in ambulances to Carroll Stream in the way that we've been doing this for years. So that's what the community scan will give us. I would be happy to send you to look at the community support program and show you the models of program that are on there that will speak to what it is that you're talking about as a way of design. Yes.
Mr. McDonald, as a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll get more directly to the point. I know we've spent roughly $1 million with Rosecrans last year. Is the Mental Health Board going to be willing to help us offset those costs moving forward?
Meaning offset in the sense of, yes, are there mental health funds that should be supportive of some of the actions that are going on now? And the answer is yes.
So go ahead, Mr. Copeland.
More importantly, if I could chime in, that part of our charge is to leverage existing resources in better ways and align them to get results based upon best practices, as opposed to everybody doing sort of their own thing and the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. That's why we started with an environmental scan, to see what the gaps are, to see where our strengths, our weaknesses, and all those, and the opportunities are, so that when money starts coming in, if I can say it this way, we're not anticipating just throwing money at a problem, but finding ways to leverage the human capital in the community, as well as the resources that are already being deployed, and put them and direct them in ways that will actually get the types of results that we want. So if the question is, will some of the funds that have been going to certain entities be offset or whatever, what we're looking for is to have the greatest impact with whatever money is available and what money is already being spent before we even talk about adding extra money into a particular pot. The other thing, to answer a question that was just before, just so I can make sure I get it in, and that is that we had R1 come in and do a presentation for us to, as we explained what types of things we would need, and to see if they would be able to accommodate those things. All of that is on the county YouTube meeting website. You can see it for yourself, for those who are not familiar how R1 works. But part of the reason that we're even connected with them, and we feel that it's a very good fit, aside from the fact that they have some subject matter expertise, not just on the content of what we're doing, but even the whole concept of collective impact, leveraging resources as opposed to just throwing money at them. The other thing is they're connected to all of these entities around us, including the county board. And we felt that since there's already some infrastructure there, that would be a natural fit for us to be able to do what I just suggested. And that is leverage what is existing, enhance what is working, fill in the gaps, and then see if we can't strengthen the entire system here.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. And that brings me to my point that essentially that was the question that Mr. Arena kind of posed. And it's a fair question to see if there was an RFP process, did we go through to see various consultants, which one's the best. You give it a little bit more information, more light to the fact that regional plan is a partner within our community, is tied to different. So I would tend to agree with that on that aspect of it. Going forward, I think one of the things is, that I'm hearing is, what's your plan for the future? What are you guys attempting to do? And, I know that you guys just set up your board and probably put in your bylaws and all that other mumbo jumbo that kind of goes into play. But I think from that perspective, I think in the near future, maybe a plan, as Mr. Coons Hooner kind of explained, that, you guys have a plan in place for the community and what you guys are looking to do. I think that would be kind of critical to kind of share with your partners as well, and what your goal objectives are trying to do with that money going forward. So just it's a thought to think about, to kind of put it out there in front of the community as well. But I'll go to Mr. Arena. He had his hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So two things, kind of following up on Mr. McDonald's comments about, he had asked about what the mental health board was going to do and helping out with the money we already spend. So it's my understanding that this is a county tax, and allocation of these funds is decided by the county board, and that we will use the expertise of the members of the mental health board to determine how the money gets spent. But ultimately, the decisions are ours. And so I guess, I don't think that any of us are in the position to question the judgment of the people who have expertise in the area. On this loan, and where the money's spent, what you've talked about this community scan, that all makes sense. And to me, that makes sense for R1 to do that work. But Mr. Schultz pointed out that we're relying on R1 to do many different things, and they can't be experts on everything. If they're designing a website for you, that's something that I definitely should go out for bid. I can't see how R1 has the most expertise in website design. I'll have to look. I don't have all the information that Mr. Copeland was putting up there to see how the money's being spent, but and I'll follow up on it before our actual board meeting. But I just want you guys from the mental health board to keep that in mind. A website is something that I think should go out for bid, and you should rely on people who that's all they do, just design websites for that stuff. And I know there was a third item that you were allocating money for, and I'll look into that, what that's about. But what you've talked about in the community scan and figuring out the needs of the community, that in my mind is the work that R1 should be doing. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I interrupt?
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Goro.
First of all, we need a database so we can sort out where the gaps are. And through that, they're going to be working on that through a person at HR, not at R1, who is qualified in the mental health field. And I've seen the survey. The survey, I think, is 8 or 9 pages long. And it's amazing what it consists of. And once they get that scan back, they're going to know what fields they need to work in. Number 2, when you ask about, Keith, will this help the first responders? Yeah, it will, because what they really should look into is go back to the past, because we had a really good program several years ago that, because of funding being cut, you no longer have. But that's where we had mental health training, and not only mental health, but for the first responders to actually recognize, do I have a mental health problem here? Do I have an alcoholic problem here? Do I have a person that's just acting out? What's my problem is, so they can do an assessment, a fast assessment. Hopefully, through our new monies coming in, that's going to be able to come back into action. You ran out of money, all the municipalities ran out of money, and they quit that program. But that program is one that has to go into more depth to see what we can do, and if we can sustain it for a long period of time. Because not only our old first responders, but our new responders have got to take those courses so they can understand there's different ways of doing business. Sometimes we're creating more trauma through our first responders, then we are helping the public. And that's one of the main things. And with this survey, we need someone who can actually sort it out, put it together. This isn't going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take a little bit of time. And we're going to get it done so that we do have good action at the end of this, that we're going to be able to go forward and get some help for our community. We're not going to go using old money that's out there right now. I know in the back of some of your minds, you think you're going to take this money and pay remedies and going to pay Rosecrans for the jail. No, that's old money, and you already have that from the first tax of 1%. That needs to be paid out of that fund, not the new money. The new money should not be paid for that. The new money should go forward to pay for new ideas, new practices, and there's a lot more involved, like even shelter for our people who have fallen through the cracks and have no place to go. There's a lot more in it, and once you see the survey, I think you're going to have a different idea of where that money should be going, and that's going to help this committee put it where it belongs and not go back and back up old money that should have been spent the way it should have been to begin with. So our job, their job, is to take that new money and find new resources and find new ways of helping to correct our mental health problem and our oh gosh, I get to talking and I forget myself, but and our addiction problem. Yeah, I know I'm getting old, but that's what I have to say. You have to understand the whole thing. Don't try already trying to transfer money from there into a dead budget that should have been taken care of a long time ago. That's not the new money's responsibility. Let them get to what they need to do to help us stop so much of what's been coming on and going on in our community. Let them work on this. We have professional people to do that and know what's supposed to be done and what's not supposed to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goro. Mr. McDonald, you had your hand up.
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. My entire time on the board, we've always passed a deficit budget. There is no old money. The old money is way gone. Include the events of this virus, and it's even worse. And I would also argue that we didn't do it well enough in the past. I look forward to doing it better in the future, but I don't accept Ms. Goro's argument of old money. We never did fund these things properly. I look forward to doing it properly, but we need help to do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I answer that? That's what the 1% sales tax was for. Remember, that's what it was to be used for. And that's where it belongs, back into the jail and what goes on inside that jail. And that is old money that we continue to collect every year, and it's not being used the way it's supposed to be used. We're paying back debt because of it. So that means on that old money, we need to find new ways of quit using that old money and use it for what the purpose of it was to begin with. We don't even have the programs we started out with because we didn't have the money out of the 1% sales tax because it was to be spent other places. So keep that in mind. One of the reasons we did this new committee was to make sure they have stability, and they need to have the stability of going forward and using that money wisely. That's why they have a 6 years clause on that. If they can't, within 6 years, come up with some good programs and show the public that they're using that money the way they should be using it, it goes away. And keep that in mind too, which should have been done with the 1% sales tax, and it wasn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goro. Mr. Fiducia, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In scanning the board members that are present at this meeting, Mrs. Goro I'll have to support Mrs. Goro on that because I became somewhat of an expert on the 1 cent sales tax and the alternative programs when I first got on the board. And but barring what she said, I think the issue we're talking about here tonight is basically a tax anticipation loan. It's going to be, whether we should give it to them or not. And if they see fit, Mr. Cooner, I've got most respect for this man. And if they see fit that R1 can help them out, then I'm going to support them on that. And I think the real issue is just whether they need that loan tonight. And I'm going to support that. And in the future, we can talk about other things.
Sure. Any more questions, comments for Mr. Copeland, Mr. Cooner, and Paul for the resolution? Seeing none. So the item right now that we're going to take a vote on is a resolution authorizing the execution of agreement to advance $45,000 to the Community Mental Health Board. So with a raise of hands or ayes, if you're in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today on
Thank
answering.
you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, okay?
Yep, thank you. So we'll move on to our next item, which is a resolution extending employer lease agreement with GovTemp US LLC for the interim county administrator up to October 2nd, 2020. Can I get a motion and a second? Motion by Mr. Girl, second by Mr. Hoffman. Discussion, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you. The board back in, I believe, May approved a contract revision with GovTemps to extend the agreement for the interim county administrator from June 6th through August 6th with the availability of extending that agreement to October 2nd. Given that we don't have another board meeting after before August 6th, that's why I brought this particular item in. Again, the language in the agreement allows for after that time a 2-week notice by the county if they want to discontinue the services. So it's just extending the agreement by 2 months.
Questions, discussion? All right, seeing none. All in favor of approving resolution extending the employer leasing agreement, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item, which is letter I, a resolution authorizing an increase in salary of the Winnebago County Public Defender. Can I get a motion and a second? Motion by Mr. Girl, second by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you, or Mr. McDonald. Discussion. Mr. Chapman, do you want to?
Yes, I'll speak to this particular item. I believe as part of the state legislature, there was a cost of living increase that was provided to the state's attorney's office, and under the statute, the full-time public defender that we have we are required to pay him 90% of the salary of the state's attorney's office. If we go ahead and pay that amount, we're eligible to receive 2/3 of his salary reimbursed back from the state. Again, the increase for the state's attorney went into effect July 1st. This would also be effective July 1st. And again, we would receive 2/3 of that increase back from the state.
Any questions regarding the resolution of the public defender salary increase? All right, seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. Our next item is an update on the financing of technology equipment. Mr. Chapman.
Okay, if you remember back, I believe last board meeting or the meeting before, the board approved the acquisition of certain firewall equipment and the installation thereof. The total to be $400,000. At that time, I indicated that the intent was to go out and get a what we call a debt certificate for 5 years, payable over the 5 years. We went out and solicited proposals from banks. We received 2 proposals. Actually, they came in today at 2:00. Let's see, the The low bid from Stillman Bank was 1% tax exempt interest rate, and the other proposal was US Bank 1.25%, or 1.23, I'm sorry. So the intent would be that our bond counsel would prepare the documents necessary to bring the debt certificate and the financing into the county board at their next meeting on your next meeting on Thursday night. We'd have to meet before the board meeting, but again, this is obviously a very good interest rate in terms of financing that equipment and getting that project accomplished.
How long is that contract or bid valid?
I believe it's that I don't know. I think the intent that we put in the resolution was, or in the bid proposals, was that it would be approved July 23rd, and that we would close on the deal by August 1st.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Chapman regarding the debt service certificate? Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the useful life of this equipment is going to be well beyond the term of the financing?
I believe it's 10 to 12 years, according to Gus.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you very much. Actually, we didn't have to vote on anything, but
well, that's okay. Yeah, we'll bring the actual document back, but
yeah, there was no resolution, no
Yeah.
budget amendment or anything.
That's okay.
I apologize for that. I'm in the mode of approving things right now. So thank you, Mr. Chapman. Let me know prior to our board meeting, and we'll have that and we'll square that away.
Yep.
The next item is 2021 budget discussion, revenue enhancement. Mr. Chapman.
The only item I have tonight is I just want the board members to start thinking about what we're going to do with our property tax levy this year, especially given how the numbers are going to probably end up. We haven't finalized anything yet, but we're obviously going to need every bit of revenue that we have. And, you know, as part of the PTAL law, you're allowed to recover at least, I think it's the rate of inflation plus new construction. I think in the past couple of years, the board has decided to just take the new construction dollars. In terms of the rate of inflation for next year, based on our extension amount, that would actually, I believe, generate an additional 900,000 without the new construction. We don't have the new construction numbers yet because the assessors are a little bit behind because of the COVID issue and that, but we should have that by the end of the month, so we can kind of make a final decision, because that's obviously going to come into effect in terms of the decisions that we make on the budget. So I'm just bringing that to everybody's attention as far as the amount of dollars we're talking about from the rate of inflation. Again, the construction numbers, once we have those, we'll let you know. So.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Chapman regarding the tax levy revenue? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine not so much about the property tax levy. Mr. Chapman, do you recall our marijuana tax? That went in effect July 1st, and we should see revenues in like September. Is that accurate?
Probably October. Well, it depends. I mean, who knows what the state with that one. Normally a sales tax, it takes 3 months, similar to what our mental health tax is. That money will be coming in October. So we should, hopefully it'll be in October, which unfortunately is past, you know, the time that we approved the budget, but we might be able to have some idea as to what those dollars would be. So.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you for allowing me a follow-up. Steve, have you seen, I know we've been doing this since what, January 1st. It was just in the news, it was 53 or 58 million that's been raised by the great state of Illinois. Do you get any kind of a breakdown as to how many of those sales came from Winnebago County in order to anticipate those revenues is what I'm asking?
I have not seen any information. I don't know if they would they might post something by county. I don't think they would post by individual, vendor or whatever, but I can check and see.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Chapman regarding the tax levy or any revenue of that sort? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is other matters. Is there any other matters to come before this committee? Yes, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak at this point. I just wanted to verify with the members of this committee, because I've got a lot of members on this committee that are members of personnel and policies. Animal Services assisted Boone County this last week, and we took 3 dogs. We gave the cats to paws, and what we've got a plan in place that we're going to offer them, but we are not going to be doing any services for Boone County. We're not going to be doing anything for Boone County. So I just want everybody to know that we just took the animals, and that's all we're doing for them. And they're doing further discussion on that issue. But Mr. Chapman and Mr. Frazier will be handling that aspect of it with the county people. But the only way I think we would want to proceed is if it would be beneficial for Winnebago County. The other matter I want to bring up is personnel and policies. We'll be having a meeting before the board meeting, and I don't know if it's going to be Zoom or if we're going to be doing it in person or how we're going to be doing it, but we're probably going to need that reference, the new administrator. So I just wanted the members that are here to know what's going on in finance, to know what's going on. Thank you, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Schultz.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just curious in terms of the budget development process, if we are anticipating any additional extra meetings for the Finance Committee in preparation for the budget.
Mr. Chapman, it would be yes and yes, but
yes and yeah. I assume at some point in time, as to what dates, I can't tell you because we haven't finalized all the numbers, to be honest with you. So I assume those meetings would be in August.
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just because we all have a variety of other commitments, the sooner we could get dates for the additional meetings, that would really be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Work on that with Mr. Chapman. And Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious. I know our last meeting, the sheriff had a budget amendment before us that we laid over. I didn't see it today. I just wondered, is there an update on that status of that amendment?
Yeah, so from my knowledge, the sheriff was not able to meet this week. I believe he's out of town, so that's why we're trying to reschedule it for the most convenient time. But yes, it was scheduled, but then we were notified through his attorney that he was going to be out of town, so we have to reschedule until further notice. But yes, thank you. Good observation. Any other matters to come before this committee? Yes, Mr. Chapman.
I have one more item. I was notified by the Sheriff's Department, if you remember, back, I think in May or June, they requested the authority to submit a grant application for 5 deputies, I believe it was, with the understanding that they would need to come back to us and actually for the county to accept that grant. I believe Mr. Haney has to sign it, and that would require county board action. They did receive the grant, or they tendered a grant, but I guess I need to come back to the committee and explain what the funding would be. It's a significant amount of money that the county would have to fund as the match. So I'll reserve comment until then, but I just want you folks to know that we're going to have to come back to the committee and, let them know what those dollars are, and, let them make that decision. But they did receive, like I said, they did receive tentative approval, but again, that's subject to the county board approving this execution of the grant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chapman. Any questions for Mr. Chapman on that? So it's something that obviously we should anticipate. We asked them to come back if they got back a word whether the grant was going to be foreseeable. So we'll have that discussion and we'll look at the numbers and make a decision on that direction from our perspective. So any other questions, other matters? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion to adjourn? Mr. Hoffman, a second by Mr. Girl. All in favor, say by saying aye.
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 All right, thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies, for